Hello there, ladies, gentlemen, and unicorns. Welcome to a different stream this time, and congratulations to Frank and Commander Stitch placing first and second on the pop quiz. Thank you so much for participating. Right, today's stream is going to be a little bit different because I want to talk a little bit about IF, that is interactive fiction. And Frank says he didn't do well though, but I mean, still, my questions I've learned, I thought the questions in the pop quiz aren't that hard, but then I realized that I'm a huge nerd when it comes to who made what when sometime in the 80s. So yeah, this is why probably the quiz is too hard for most people. But again, still thank you for playing. Right, so interactive fiction. Let me switch over that we can talk about it. Yes, this was not what I wanted, sorry. I want the screen, of course, because there's a beginner IF jam hosted by Michael Clamerus, not quite sure how to pronounce their name. And yes, it's a super chill, laid-back stream for people who want to dabble in interactive fiction, who never actually gave it a thought, but yeah, I think this is a good chance as any to talk about interactive fiction and what's enticing about it. Even I somehow fell into the rabbit hole that is IF and what you can do with it. And yeah, this stream is intended more or less as a sort of short introduction to IF, and especially one of the tools that we'll be looking at, that is Twine. And even if you're not a programmer at all, how to get a sort of interactive story started and how you can keep adding to it to make it more of an interactive fiction experience. I'm not using the word game because with Twine everything is a story, but you can make a full-fledged RPG out of it if you want to. And yeah, this is the things that I thought would be interesting for today. And yeah, it's a good time because there's super chill IF jam, because the submissions are open from 3rd of July until September 30th. So there is a lot of time, and there are the rules. Essentially, you can, as long as you haven't published your game, you can participate in there, and it's meant to get newcomers to IF, and if you're not a newcomer, it's still a good way to a good opportunity to start something new. Right, so this one is on itch.io, and it's just beginner-if-jam. Is it a dash? It's this little minus sign there. Cool. So let me have a look at the chat. I know nothing about consoles or 90s or 2000s gaming, but I should know that. But you still placed very well then, Frank. And thank you so much for this stream, says Henry993. Henry, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, and you're very welcome. Commander Stitch says, I'm out west at the moment. Will watch the archived stream for sure when I get time. Just want to say hi from Oregon. Oh, wonderful. So you're on the Oregon Trail then. Yeah, that's a bad pun. I'm not. It's not even a pun. So still, thank you so much for dropping by. Nonetheless, it's very much appreciated. Right. So where was I? Yeah, there we are again. Interactive fiction. So, what actually is interactive fiction? Is it a graphic novel? Essentially, could be. Yes. Essentially, I think that interactive fiction, it's hard to pin down, but essentially it's a story that plays out with in conjunction with the player and the game developer as the author, where together they tell a story in some sense. This sounds somewhat overly intellectual or anything, but you probably have already known about some sort of interactive fiction, maybe even if you didn't realize it, that it was developed with an interactive fiction background. Right, so the older people among us probably remember Infocom. This was, I think, Massachusetts-based developer. And it was, they just made text games, essentially. And you probably know some of their games. I have here Zork 1, 2, 3, 4, Zork 0, and so on, but also games like Star Cross or A Mind Forever Voyaging. So pretty much it was like, it was books of pretty much any genre: fantasy, science fiction, comedy, detective, whodunit novels, pretty much anything, even things artistic in nature and so on. But they were all parser based, which means the games back then, Infocom's games looked like this. You got a little bit of description, and then the game just told you what you would see in this moment, and then there was a prompt where you could say, yeah, I want to try something like get lamp, or talk to this NPC, or use door. You probably are guessing where this is going. So this was this entire text adventure genre there, and interactive fiction can be a subset, or let's put it differently. Text adventure games are a subset of interactive fiction. They are more, they are less stories in a sense. They are more rule based, where you have a big world state. For example, the world knows where doors are open and not open, closed, and so on. But essentially, it's about it's like more or less like a point and click adventure, but with much more to it, because in traditional graphic point and click adventures, you had this set of verbs because it came from text adventures, and they have been dumbed down even further to nowadays you mostly just got an interact button. But back then, with the text adventures, you really had to think as a player. It felt more like you were really talking or with the game maker, where you would say, jump up or jump on ledge or something like this, because you couldn't know what verbs were implemented or not. So it felt much more like freeform. In point and click adventure, you would, if you don't come to a solution to a puzzle, you just brute force and try everything with everything, and you might get there. With text adventures, because it was so open, they really made you think. But again, there were more rules and state based. Whereas interactive fiction, it's more like the choose your own adventure books. But as we will see in a bit, they can be quite big and complicated. So it's not as simple as A or B, choose A or B, and then you get a different path, for example. So yeah, this is how the interactive fiction games looked back then, and this is how they look now. This is a screenshot from Sorcery! I think it's a mobile from, was it Inkle? I think from Inkle. And you can do entire RPGs, and the good thing about text is that it uses the most powerful graphics processor that is out there, that is your imagination. I think this is also what Infocom marketed their games with, because I mean, it's true, if you read something and you envision the entire world in your mind, same thing of course works with interactive fiction. Right, and of course this is other game that also has big interactive fiction sections. This is from Sunless Skies. If you've played Sunless Sea, Sunless Skies from Fail Better, there are big sections where it's just you read something and then you choose one or other, essentially how to proceed. But you got, depending on your character stats, you got different paths you could choose. For example, if you're, let's say, in another game, maybe if your dexterity is not high enough, you don't have an option to pursue something, and so on. So you can see you could go this way, but your character is not equipped for this. But maybe with the next playthrough, you could try what happens with that option, and so on. So it's a quite interesting way of having this top-down exploration game, but with these big sections of interactive fiction. So today we're going to talk about the actual nitty-gritty of how to get started with interactive fiction, and I think the easiest way to get started with as a writer, as an interactive fiction developer, is with Twine. There are of course many different tools out there where you can do interactive fiction, and I will just introduce some of them. So Twine is one of them, and it was used in scripting the Bandersnatch episode of Black Mirror, if you've seen it on Netflix, where essentially you as the audience could choose at certain points where to go. And the entire thing was scripted with Twine. So essentially it was choose your own screenplay. which I found quite interesting. Then, of course, there is Inform 7, and Frank here in the stream, in the chat, will probably can tell you a lot about Inform 7 because he made many Ludum Dare games in Inform 7. So Inform 7 is essentially, I don't want to say a continuation of what Infocom did, but in a sense, it's very much its grandchild of the language, but it's a completely different language now. For example, in Inform 7, never heard of it. Yeah, try to make your try to distract from your experience with Inform 7. It's not going to work. So yeah, with Inform 7 now there was a big jump from Inform 6 to Inform 7 because Inform 6 was more programmery in a sense, and Inform 7 is really trying to be of more interest for people who aren't that much versed with programming. So essentially you would make a room in Inform 7 like the office is a room, period. In the room there is a chair. On the chair there is a pen. And so on and so forth. And essentially you're programming, but you're using everyday English to do so. The problem or the downside of this is, of course, if you're a programmer, you probably want to get to do things faster without having to type everything out. And if you aren't a programmer, things could be a bit too terse, or not too terse, but too constricted in a way, because you always have to say the office is a room. You can't say the office, the other thing, and are rooms, but the other one is not a room. It's a bad example, but the point is that it doesn't look like a programming language because it's natural English, but you have to follow a certain grammar very much to the dot. So, of course, you can also program in Inform 6 if that's more to your liking. But, one of the games that was done with Inform 6 was, for example, Anchorhead, which is a Lovecraftian text adventure, essentially, that takes place in a town in New England, and things are going for a couple of days. The end of the world is nigh, and so on and so forth. So this is a super. This has been, I think, has even gotten some awards. The game is now over 20 years old, the original version. But there's a reimagined Steam version if you want to take a look at it. It's with images and illustrations, but at the heart, it's still a text game, and where it's in the end, you have to type things, what you want to try and what you want to do. And the other thing about this kind of text adventures is that you have to draw maps yourself. Right, the other thing that there is TADS, or the Text Adventure Development System. This one, if you're programming in C, well, TADS has you covered. This feels like a proper programming language, and this one has a very involved set of world state. In a sense, what does world state mean? Well, the engine, or in this case the development system, when you make a room, knows about one room can be on top of another room, and if you drop something in one room that's on top, it will automatically drop until the bottommost room, for example. Or you have different sorts of light propagation, so where you can say a room is dark and the other is light, and there is a hallway in between, and in this hallway will filter some light from the room that is lit, and so on and so forth. So it's super complicated, or it can be super complicated. Of course, if you need all these affordances and containers within containers and teleports, all kind of shit like that, then TADS might be something for you if you are like C-style programming. So if you're a beginner, this is probably not how you want to get started. They get lots of documents, and there's even an O'Reilly-styled book or a PDF there that is geared on how to get newcomers to this. But again, if you're not a programmer, you probably won't have a lot of fun with it. And what I've realized is that it's quite prone, if you're not doing things correctly, to crashes. And I've lost even some work with it. I think it was an older version of TADS, but just be on the lookout to save more. And this is, for example, how a TADS game could look like. In the end, it's also HTML. But you can also have some sort of images there, and as you can see, yeah, in the screenshot you even got directions where you can click and where to go. So yeah, this game that is called 1893, A World's Fair Mystery or something, this is, I think, the most notable game that was done in TEDs. Right, Frank says, I've never used Inform 6, but it's a C-like syntax. So lots of parentheses and function brackets. The Infocom games were written in ZIL, which I believe is Lisp-like. Yeah, ZIL, that was the original programming language. I think it was by Dave Lebling and Mike Berlin developed. But essentially it's an interpreted language. And it was very much like Lisp, so you have a lot of parentheses to work with. But yeah, Inform is something different, but I mean, it's also an interpreted language, which means you can run it in HTML, but you can also play it on your phone and so on, because the core is transportable to different sorts of devices, and all you need is an interpreter for this kind of code, a lot like Java, for example. Right, and then of course we have Ink, which I find is super interesting. This one was developed by Inkle, that is the game developer behind games like 80 Days and Overboard, and I think Heaven's Vault was also by Inkle. And the cool thing about Ink is it's very much writer focused, but you can implement it or import it into Unity and use all the wonderful functions that you have in Unity with Ink. And let me switch over to my screen that I can show you some of those development systems, how they look like. For example, yeah, this is TEDS, the text adventure development system. And if you want to download TEDS, you get it for Windows, Linux, Mac OS, and you want to play a game, you write your own game. So this looks super welcoming. But then of course there are, let's have a look at the manuals. And yeah, learning TEDS 3. This is this O'Reilly kind of styled book, and it's 341 pages. So it's a lot. And yeah, for example, this is how TEDS looks like under the hood. So if this doesn't scare you off, then you might want to have a look at TEDS. Then here is Inform, which looks also super welcoming. And if you have a look at the documentation, there's the recipe book, which I find quite interesting, because in Twine you have the Twine cookbook, so everything is very culinary based. But let's have a look at the examples. So Disenchantment Bay 7. Is there something that there is a bit of code there? There you can see the cabin is a room, and then there is, as a string, is between quotation marks, the front of the small cabin is entirely occupied, and so on and so forth. And then you say a glass case against the wall contains several fishing rods. So essentially it looks like plain English, but it's a programming language. And here we are with Ink, and this is how Ink looks like. So essentially you got this, it looks a bit with all those indentations, a bit like Python, but it's something else entirely. But you can, it's super nice to implement. For example, it knows which paths or which sections you already have visited, and you don't need to name them all, only those you want to check against, for example. And yeah, it's as it says, a narrative scripting language for games, which is super helpful because you can make standalone games that just run in the browser with Inkle, not Inkle, it's Inky, sorry, this one here. This is to write, test, and export your Ink stories in one app, and of course you can implement Ink in Unity. And the fun thing is it's open source, so this is quite something to look at if you don't feel you want to encode your completely novel and original own text engine, because Inkle has already done this and had open sourced it, and it has been around for a couple of years. And there have been entire games written in Ink, and I think even some sections in other games use Ink. For example, I think I couldn't confirm this, but I think Sunless Seas and Sunless Skies uses Ink for all their IF interactive fiction stuff. Right, so 80 days, if anyone has played this on their phone, this is something that I can fully recommend to pay the price for. It's a steampunk in around the world in 80 days game, and it's just wonderful because it's entirely text-based. You can, there is a very simple trading game in there about your traveling money and so on. But if you take the same route again, it's completely different text. It has like more text is in this game than in the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, I think, has been said. So it's quite something, and it's always when I'm in line and I play 80 days, no matter how long I'm in line, it's not enough, because then I want to just continue playing. So if you play 80 days when you want to get asleep, and then you realize you've been playing the game on your phone trying to get asleep for 2 hours. And the other game from Inkle that's also based on ink, that is Overboard, which has been out for I think 2 or 3 weeks now. Right, and the final option, of course, is to write your own engine. You can pretty much use anything that outputs text and allows for user input. You can turn this into an interactive fiction game. For example, the early ones have been done with BASIC. I even did my own first experiences, my own dabbles with interactive fiction like 30 years ago in MS Microsoft Basic, for example. But you can also do it in C#, in C++, pretty much whatever just prints out some text on a terminal. But of course you don't want to reinvent the wheel when the work has already been done by other people. Which brings us to Twine. So this is what we're here for. I'm going to introduce you to Twine, how Twine works, and the different story formats of Twine. I will just gloss over them, but and then we will do a little bit of Twine programming, and I'll show you some of the cool things you can do with Twine. So again, this is geared towards newcomers, but I'm pretty sure that I will get into more advanced programming concepts. But please, if you have any questions or anything, just put it in the chat and I will try to answer your questions. Right, so how to get Twine. The cool thing about Twine is it's open source, and you can get it at twinery.org. And there, the current version is 2.3.14. And again, you get here some example games, some screenshots, and essentially this is how Twine works. Well, it looks a bit overwhelming, but essentially it's just you write passages of text, and those passages can link to other passages or can link back, and so on and so forth. So essentially, this is how Twine works. If you envision it as this sort of graph where one thing leads to the next and so on, this is pretty much how to think or how to visualize Twine games that you're working on. Right, so you just download it for Windows, Mac OS or Linux, and you know what, you can even use it online. The problem about this, of course, is that nothing gets stored online. You always have to export your game to an HTML file if you want to retain it. So this is something that is super important if you work online, because it's only in your browser, essentially. Cool. I even made some Twine games myself. The first one here was for Ludum Dare. This was Power MT, and this is how the game looked like. So if you want to give it a spin, I can post you the link. There we go. If I just play shortly into it, you can see here it has some music. And you click on something and then you proceed to the next paragraph. And in my case, you can even have here this phone thing here where you can switch on certain apps on your phone. And yeah, the story starts and you can say, do I want to go out the front door or the back door? Let's go with the back door and run to the front or jump over the fence and so on and so forth. So essentially, you can have certain variables that you can track yourself and change text or even entire parts of your game depending on the state of certain variables. You don't have to do this, but it's cool that you can do it. By the way, also of course, this is my post-mortem. All right, I wanted to paste the link to PowerMT. There we go. So this is the link to the game, and this is my post-mortem, which I'm super proud of because yeah, this one is my entire experience of making a game in 48 hours. So many of you already know this, but I still, why not plug my own videos? And of course, this was not my last Twine game. The other one was the Sacrificial Trail, and this is more game-like, whereas PowerMT was more of a narrative experience where the game killed you off pretty quickly if you were taking the wrong path. But this one here is more about it's a bit like an Oregon Trail like experience, where you can say, okay, which do I want to travel slow, steady, or fast? Let's go with steady. And which road I want to travel on, and depending on which road you pick, you spend some gasoline, you have some sort of fatigue, and you make a certain distance. And of course, if you overly fatigue, or you run out of gasoline, or don't make it in the allotted time that you have to your destination, it's game over. And of course, will you buy something? For example, here I even have a little shop implemented, and this is all you can all and much more than this you can do in Twine. And as you've heard before with the game, there's even the option to have audio, to have sound. Pretty much anything that you can do in a web browser you can do with Twine, which is super nice. The Unicorn Trail, says Frank. Wonderful. And Henry says, my favorite postmortem. Thank you so much. This is the PowerMT. I'm very proud of this postmortem. Right, so how does Twine work? So once you download it, and then you install it, and then you start it. My Twine has already a few stories in there. This is FMV Detective. This was for my detective FMV game. Again, it was a bit like Bandersnatch, where I just planned out how the game would branch. Then this, of course, is PowerMT, which I've shown you before. So this is how it looks like here in my editor. And this is what the Sacrificial Trail looks like. And this one, you can see much less connections between the nodes, because pretty much everything is done programmatically and not the flow how you usually would have it, apart here from, for example, here from this title, where the title goes to start, goes to look at the person, goes to intro, and so on and so forth. Right, so let's, by the way, if you want to import something into Twine, if someone says, I've made this Twine game and this is how you can play it, or you want to take a look at their source code, for example, how they set up things in Twine. And the cool thing about Twine is you just download the HTML file. In my case, this is the game I'm currently working on, which is just called Twine Detective. And it's an HTML file. And if I launch the HTML file, where is my browser? Sorry. There is my browser. So if I just launch the HTML file, it's the game, right? And if I don't double click it, but drag it into Twine, look at this. There is the game, and I can edit and modify it here in Twine. So this is something that I very much enjoy about Twine, because it's super easy to go between editing something and playing something. Okay, but let's start out with a completely new story. One thing is, of course, you can switch between day mode and night mode. I don't know which is easier for you on the eyes, so I always go with dark mode, because otherwise I'm just being blasted with the brightness from my screens. So, and one thing is that is super important when you start out is here you can say you want to create a brand new story, but there is something that is called formats. And this is super important, because this is something that as a newcomer you wouldn't know what this means. So you want, by default, a new story is in the Harlow 3.22 format. So this says it's the default story format for Twine 2. Now with an editor toolbar, consult its documentation. But what is Harlow 2.1? What is Snowman? What is SugarCube? What is Chapbook? So essentially, it's not entirely different programming languages, because there is a certain subset that always works the same among story formats in Twine. But different story formats, it's more like certain dialects of the same language. For example, with one language, it's much easier to get started when you complete newbie, but at a certain point, if you want to make something that is a bit more involved, things are much harder to force the story format into doing what you want. Whereas other story formats, they feel a bit like they're cumbersome when you want to do easy or simple stuff, but the more complex things you want to make, the easier it is to implement, or the less you have to build very weird constructions or just setups to get something work. I know this probably, if you're new to this, you have no idea which one to pick. Usually, again, since this is the default, just start with Harlow 322. In this stream, I will be working with SugarCube, mostly because it's the one that is most like programming, and it's but again, the basic functionality for beginners is very much the same as with Harlow. Again, there are just minor differences, and everything has a link to a documentation. So I really urge you to, as soon as you decide for a story format, again, I would, if you're new to this, I would strongly recommend going with Harlow. You click documentation, and it opens its documentation in a browser. Let me show you the browser. This is how the documentation looks like. And it says here the basics, how to link to something, and how the style works. For example, if you want to have something in italics, in bold, but essentially underlying everything is that it is HTML. And if you use HTML markup, you can still essentially have it displayed like a web page. If you, for example, if you want to have links that click completely outside, that link to something that is completely outside of your story. For example, if you want to have a new passage going from one passage to the next, just put it between two square brackets and use this little arrow symbol, and there you go. For example, I think this is the easiest example of how to do this markup here in Harlow. So again, everything, it tells you right away how to do everything, how you can pass data, what macros are, how you can use your own macros, and so on and so forth. So every story format comes with some sort of manual, and which is super helpful. So about Twine, the other thing that I've referred to was the Twine cookbook. And this is reference documentation and examples, because if you're somewhat like me, I learn best by looking at certain examples of some code and then just try to adapt it to my own style. The typical trade-off, Frank says, in terms of programming language, essentially just pick the one that essentially is best suited to your problem. You don't know what your problem is, then stick with Harlow for the time being. So here, what is cool about the Twine cookbook is, for example, you get here Twine 2 examples. For example, you need something with delayed text. And the cool thing about this is it shows you examples for the different story formats, for Chapbook, for Harlow, for SugarCube. And so essentially, it just tells you what it does, and you can download the example and even have here the code. And this is it again in SugarCube, and in Chapbook it looks a bit different. It says here after 5s colon a semicolon append, and there you go. And in Snowman it looks a bit weird. Okay, so this was the other one. This was thank you. I was doing date and time, so of course this looks different, but just to get a feeling for where you can look for help. And the other thing, of course, is there is, let me return, there is, I think, a Discord. Yes, there is a Discord with very helpful people, and of course there is the forum where you can also ask newbie questions. And last but not least, as always, just Google something and it will probably land you somewhere in this forum, where, I mean, especially when you get started out, you have problems, or you run into certain problems that a lot of people had before you. So the chances are very good that you find something here. Right. So let's return to our brand new story. And again, before you click story, make sure that you pick the right format. Again, if you want to follow along whatever I'm doing, because I have nothing really planned what I'm doing specifically, let's just pick the newest SugarCube, and I click the documentation. So let me bring it over here. That I close now pretty much everything else that we only have the documentation open, because I will be referring to the documentation probably quite a lot. And the SugarCube 2 documentation is very neat because it's just one super long web page where you can find everything by just using the find some, let's go with a timed and variable macros. There we go, with timed passage, timed execution, and so on and so forth. So yeah, pretty much everything there, especially if you're versed with programming, you know what to look for when it comes to markup or script and so on and so forth. So yeah, let's pick SugarCube finally, and I say a new story, and I call this stream story. And I will zoom in when I'm doing something that you can actually read it and follow along. Right, so we start here with one unnamed passage, and it has this little rocket ship icon next to it, and this one means the story starts here. You can say here story starts here. Of course, it's only one passage, but essentially just to get the names right, a story is an entire project in this case, and those little bits are called passages, and you essentially link from passage to passage, and you of course can have some sort of control flow decisions in between, and you can of course do set up your own variables if you want to track something, and so on and so forth. Right. This story will be a stream of consciousness, says Frank, and it probably will be. This is a very, very good assessment of how this is going. Right, so it says double click this passage to edit it. And here we got an untitled passage, which we can name to start, for example, and we can even give it a tag. There are certain tags that are built in, which mean certain things with certain story formats. I won't get into any of this right now, but for example, you can also use tags yourself. For example, if you say something is, I'm sorry that it always jumps around, indoors, the game itself just says this one has to tag indoors, but you as a player or as an author can say, okay, whenever you are indoors, let's change the background color to something dark, for example. This is something that is super simple to do, and actually, yeah, very, very, very simple to set up, and it's one of those things. I want to remove indoors now. It's one of those things that can be really powerful. But right now, let's just write something, and let's start with something that is super old and super worn. But yeah, sure, why not? It was, or you know what? One thing is about the writing style. You can pretty much use anything that you want. For example, you can use the past participle. You can set your story in the present, which usually I do. You can have it in the first person. You can have it in the third person. Whatever you do, it's just best to stick to it and don't change it up. For example, so let's go with the second person. So look at this. It even says enter the body of your text passage here to link to another passage. Put 2 square brackets around its name, like this. So this is very, very helpful and very friendly. So let's say it is a dark and stormy night. You are out of coffee. What will you do? You don't, of course, you don't have to put your links at the end of the passage. You can have them pretty much anywhere. So I create a new passage and I say go outside for some reason, and I just put it here between 2 square brackets. And now that I've exited it, look here, a new passage has been created that is called go outside, and it says here double click this passage to edit it. So I delete this text and I say, you're outside now, still no coffee. But now we can say, go back inside. And we want then to link back to the first passage. But woe upon woe, it created a new passage and didn't go back to start. The only thing that you could do now is, instead of writing go back inside, I just cut this here and say start, because this is exactly the name of start. So you can't see it, but it should go back and forth. So now it's a good time actually to test it, right? And Frank, by the way, recommends future tense because you never know what your player is going to make. So keep everything very open and in the future. So will you go outside? No, yeah. You missed a bracket. Thank you very much. This is why I have you trusted people there follow along my horrible code. So okay, so you've made a game. Congratulations. How can you play it? How can you test it? How can you do anything with it? So one thing is down here you have play and test, and of course you can have a different kind of story structure display, and you can even find something if your story gets bigger and bigger. But for now we just want to play the story, and if I hit play, what happens? A new there we go. In the browser, if you have already a browser open, it just opens a new tab there. And here this is the typical setup of a SugarCube story. You have this sidebar that you can open and collapse. By default, it's opened, and it says here, it's a dark and stormy night. Or let's make this a little bit less. And sunless skies, I googled sunless skies before. I'll make it a bit less noisy there on the screen. So it's a dark and stormy night. You're out of coffee. What will you do? Well, of course, go outside. And there it says exactly as we want. And I click start, and we're back at the starting passage. But wouldn't it be nice if we could say something differently and say, yeah, go back inside, and then only have, but link to this passage that is called start. And of course, you can do this. And instead of just having here start, you just say what the link should say. For example, go back. Sorry, this zooming in app. This always gets a bit wonky as soon as I start. So start typing. So right, finish my thought. Go back inside. And now I use a pipe character that is this dash, and I put in the name. No, why are you? Yeah. And the name is start. So this is essentially how you link something. The first part is what to display to the player, and the second is the name. And if you don't have a name or you don't use this pipe character, it goes to whatever the passage is called. You have to beware, however, that if you use different casing, for example, go outside with a small g and a capital G are different passages. Same thing is if you start with a space in front, it's a different passage. So you have to be a bit careful that it's exactly the same name. So you don't use start with a small s and so on. So yeah, just to get this straight from the get-go. I'm really sorry if this is super frantic, this zooming in here. It's not the best app that I have, but it's the only app I have. So let's play again. Go outside, and it says here, go back inside. So we can go outside and go inside, and congratulations, this is actually some sort of interactive fiction. It's not very interesting interactive fiction, but it passes at least the overly technical definition of it. Sorry, I'm not so good with words. Maybe I shouldn't do interactive fiction. Right, so yeah, of course, we can also add a new passage here, and we say stay inside, and if you can see here, we even get a context menu where I just type one letter, and it always already suggests where we can go. For example, but you can see, because I called this for go back inside, it now is internally as a passage, but that we deleted, so you can't always trust those names. But let's say stay inside and look for, or look and look in the kitchen. Let's stay inside and look in the kitchen. Pipe character, kitchen, 2 brackets, and I don't need to hit save or anything. As soon as I click outside of it, it's automatically saved. Story has a solid central conflict, says Cursiboo, and yeah, just no resolution. Exactly. Right now it's very dramatic. It's a drama. So you can see just following those little arrows, it's super simple to visually follow along. Again, for me this is very helpful if I have this sort of visual way to refer to my story or just have an overall view of the story. And of course you can move it around, you can switch the zoom sizes and so on and so forth, and with just holding down the middle mouse button and moving it around, you can move around the view here in the viewer essentially. So bring in a monster, says Fernify. And hi, welcome, thank you so much for dropping by, Fernify, and also thanks for feeding the automated unicorn, the real Alex Parker. This is the real X Parker, and it's not Alex, I always say Alex, so it's the real X Parker. I'm real Xy, sorry. This was horrible. Okay, so we're in the kitchen. You enter the kitchen for the first time. It's dark. And now we can say switch on the light. And now it would be interesting, or it would be nice if we could somehow track whether the light in the kitchen has been switched on or not. And it would also be nice if when we enter the kitchen for the second time, that it doesn't write for the first time again, because the game keeps track of where you already have been. And different story formats have different ways of doing this, and again I'm using SugarCube, and with SugarCube I'm just using my own variables. And I show you how to set up variables and how to test for variables. But there, of course, is some other interesting thing that is especially nice for this kind of auto-generated text, is to have a number, a little bouquet of certain text prompts, and the game just chooses one at random, which is super helpful, and I just hope that I remember how to use it correctly. So you enter the kitchen for the first time, and we can say, yeah, it's dark, and sorry, there we go, and it smells. And now we can say we want different, depending on how often the player visits. For example, it should just pick a random adjective. It smells bad, it smells good, it smells moldy, or so on and so forth. So we would need to automatically switch on this. Then of course we want for the first time to have this only displayed the first time we enter the kitchen, and we want to make sure if the light has been switched on or not. So I keep now switch on the light currently where it is, and I link and say go back where you came from, and that is start. But the first time that we enter the kitchen, of course, I want to tell the game, please remember that we entered the kitchen, and I'm doing this now by using a variable. And I do this by using macros, macro. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. Macros. I will go with macro or macro. Yeah, I will dither between those two pronunciations, so again, I'm sorry. And Lady Mistleaf is here. Hey, we're making interactive fiction. So the macros here, you can use different macros for different things. For example, you can use set or unset to work with variables, which we're going to do. You can run scripts, you can display variables, for example. You can control something. This is just for control flow, where you can, if or for and a switch statement, or you can make buttons and checkboxes and links and list boxes or text areas, which is kind of cool because maybe you want to ask the player to enter their name and use that as a variable, and then later in the text just refer to the player by their name that they've entered before, which is super cool as a player. If something, it feels super seamless because it's just text. So I always like this. And of course, since this is everything is JavaScript based, you can also make your own functions and everything and so on. But there are, of course, certain functions that have already been implemented. For example, here, this is what we're going to use, has visited. And this just returns a true or false. So you can say if has visited and the name of the section, then we can change a variable or display different text. And the other thing that we're going to use is either. So we can use this to display one of actually it shouldn't be either, it should be one of these, but either is just a single word and catchier. So this is what we're going to use. You enter the kitchen, it's dark and it smells, and now we go either horrible, moldy, nice, and what's another smell? Like someone burned an entire tire. Pun intended. So it doesn't have to be just one word, it can be a big section of words. And of course, the next thing that we want to say before we switch on the light is, of course, you enter the kitchen for the first time. But we only want, of course, to display this when we actually enter the kitchen for the first time. But so far, you know what, let's just test what we have. And I have here even a blank passage that I don't need, so I can just delete it, and it prompts me if I really want to delete it. Seems not closed correctly. Didn't I close it not correctly again? Either horrible. Yeah, we will see if this works. So again, we have a dark and stormy night. Let's make this bigger that it's easier for you to read. Is this legible? It is, before it gets hidden behind the sidebar. Right, so let's go and look inside the kitchen, and you can see here something happened here because it's displaying our function here literally, right? So it didn't work as intended because, yeah, we need, of course, to enclose it somehow. And let's have a look at what the documentation says. And of course, it says either returns a random pi from the whole array. You can also, of course, use an array or something, but essentially you actually in SugarCube you need to assign this to a variable, if I remember correctly. So again, but the cool thing is, if you have a JavaScript array, you can use it, just say one thing from this array and you store the array elsewhere, right? So we need to display what we have here, and let me switch over here to the kitchen. And for this now we need to use one of the macros that we have, and it smells, and all the SugarCube macros look like HTML but with 2 pointy brackets on each side. And for this I will say just print, and then I just say print either, and at the end I use the closing pointy brackets, and now hopefully it should work. It smells dark and horrible. Go back where you came from, and we go back inside the kitchen, and it smells horrible. And it smells like someone burned an entire tire, pun intended, and I didn't close the bracket, and this was what you were referring to. So thanks. And the one thing is that what could be a bit problematic is when you have longer kinds of text that change or where you have a lot of this procedural generation in here, it can be a bit daunting to read this, because the problem is you don't have any kind of syntax highlighting there. Everything is just gray, and at the first glance you don't know, okay, so this is part of a print statement, but if you have like 3 or 4 paragraphs in there, and with all text that depends on the certain variable, it becomes a bit problematic to read. So the one thing is that we could do is that we just indent something, that we just say, okay, for here this is a print statement, and everything that is not a print statement we just use paragraphs here in our source code as we would use in any other programming language. Maybe not in Python, because with all the indents and so on. But if we run this now, the problem is that, and it smells break, horrible, break. So all the empty lines still get carried across. And maybe this is something, if you want to have your story or your source code tidy, you don't want that it keeps all those page or paragraph breaks in there. And this is something that I realized that it's much easier if I do all those paragraph breaks myself when I need them, but to have my source code cleaner. And now we're going to use a tag. This is just sorry for all the back and forth, no bur, to not break anything. And then pretty much anything that is there behaves like just it's one space. It's just one space and it doesn't add up the spaces. So if we play this again now, and we stay inside and look inside the kitchen, you can see even our link here just continues on the line. So maybe I want all my different or my section of links at the end for the player to choose on a different paragraph. But here it's easy to read. And someone burned an entire tire, pun intended, and go back where you came from. But in the code, it's much easier and much more legible. Right, so we want you enter the kitchen for the first time. But again, we want to, of course, to display this only the first time that we enter the kitchen, actual. So you enter the kitchen, and we want to display for the first time only if we have been here for the first time. So, and now I'm going to use something very common in programming, that is an if statement to do something when one condition is true or is met, or to do something else if the condition is not met. And this you do by if statements. So I just say if, and what did sorry for going back and forth. So I can close all the other things here, and I think I just closed so SugarCube 2 documentation, there we go. And what did we have here under functions? It was the has visited thing, and again this just returns true or false. Let me open it, and it returns a boolean, which means either true or false. So again, if, what was it, has visited, and it's the name of, we need to use this as a string, so we need to put it between two quotation marks, has visited kitchen, then whatever comes after this if gets executed if this condition is true. What you can also do if you want to be super thorough, you can just say two equal signs equals true, or even equals the boolean type of true. But yeah, for this, if it's true, you just need to say if it has visited kitchen, then if it's true, the code will run. Okay, but it will run the entire thing until down here. So we need to end this if block. We need to indicate where this ends. In other programming languages, you would use curly brackets or something. Here you need to do it more like in HTML. You need a closing tag for if. And of course, we also want not this, it's dark and smells. This doesn't belong to this if statement anymore, because this one should get printed either way. So it says you enter the kitchen, and only if you haven't visited it for the first time. So, but it's now the other way completely. It's not completely, but the other way around. Did I just? Yeah, there we go. Because it should say if we haven't visited the kitchen, it should say. So now we could say if has visited equals false, and now this should play out correctly. Let's give this a test. If I recall correctly, it has visited in quotation marks. Let me check it. You enter the kitchen. There's this one stray this one stray space, but I think it's cool for now. Then I go back where I came from, and you enter the kitchen for the first time, and of course it didn't run. So apparently, yeah, you let's try this. That we have to put this between two quotes, right? If the real X Parker says so, because it's the real X Parker, so who am I to argue? So, and error, bad conditional expression for the if clause. So expected, unexpected token identifier. This is super helpful, but it also can, if you use this little arrow here, it really shows you the line where something is wrong. So I'm not quite sure that it uses these quotation marks. So we're already in debugging mode here. So if has not visited the kitchen, so let me try something else that is using the logical operator of not, that is the exclamation point. I'm not quite sure if this works, but let's find out. No, it does not work. Okay, now here we are, and don't trust me. Yeah, I'm happy to trust anyone who's helping me out. So this has visited for some reason. Did I type kitchen correctly? For one thing, I did. So let's look at the documentation, and again it looks like, oh my god, I used the wrong zoom button. There we go. If has visited bar has been to the bar, end of if. So exactly, oh, here we can say if not has visited. There we go. So it's helpful to use a not. So again, let's try to stay inside the kitchen. You enter the kitchen, but for the first time. Okay, why is this a problem here? Probably because we have visited kitchen. This is our first visit to the kitchen, right? Did you actually declare the variable? No, in this case, this is not a variable. This is just the return of this function. So it doesn't need to be a variable. And the cool thing about this game also is you don't need to declare variables because it's JavaScript, and JavaScript usually wants to try to run anything that it can and only complains if there is really a problem. So you know what? Instead of using has visited kitchen, let's do it differently and run our own variables. There are two kinds of variables that you can use in SugarCube. There's one global variable that's accessible from pretty much all the passages. So once it's been declared, you can access it from anywhere. This is cool if you want to use flags. The cool thing is, of course, it doesn't have to be of a value type. It can be a JavaScript object, a variable. So you can go crazy with JavaScript objects. You can have nested arrays in there, pretty much anything that you want. And believe me, I want more than I actually need in my game, because I want to make things super tidy and super modular, but the game so far doesn't use it. But we will look at this probably in a bit. So let's roll our own variables. And we can say here, you enter the kitchen for the first time. So probably we should create our own flag, and that just is has visited kitchen or has been to kitchen. And variables, I can set variables in SugarCube by using I'm really sorry that it just jumps around. The set command. I should use, apparently I need to always have the mouse that it doesn't move around. So, and now I can use, if I want this kind of global variable, I use a $sign, and if I need this variable only temporary, for example, when doing for loops and so on, I use an underscore. But we want this variable to be accessible at a later time, maybe also from other passages. So I just create a new variable that I call has visited kitchen, and I set it to true. You can use the English word to. You can also use the equal sign as for the assignment. You can also, if you use condition checks, you can of course use less than or greater than or not, but you can also use less than or greater or equal than, and so on. I think it's greater GTE or something, but to me I always want to see the symbols there. So this is why I say has visited kitchen equals true. And now I can just test this here and say if has visited kitchen, of course I need the $sign in front, and let's see if this works now. Because the first time, just to tell you what's going to happen, the first time when we enter the kitchen, the variable is only defined down here. So up here it's undefined. Usually a programming language would spew an error and say, okay, this variable is undefined, crash, I'm out of here, it's not my business. But let's see what happens. So stay inside and look in the kitchen, and you enter the kitchen, and again it's the same problem that we've had before. At a certain point now, I'm not quite sure if it's me, if I did something wrong. So you know what, let's initialize this value at the beginning of our story, because apparently we need to initialize our variables if we want to use them. So how to do this? Usually you would think to make a new passage that runs the very first time when you enter the game, and then bumps you to the very first passage where the game should actually begin, so that you do all your setup and all your initializations in a certain passage. The cool thing is SugarCube 2 already has some sort of passage like this, and it also has a very sensible name, and it's called, so I create, just to tell you what I'm doing. I now manually create a passage by just clicking here, and there's a new passage, and I name this passage to, I have to zoom out and I can't name it. Okay, let me try again. Why can't I name this passage anymore? Right click. I can't name this passage anymore, so I will restart Twine now. Probably it's because of all this zooming in and zooming out. So there we are, untitled passage. Yeah, now I can edit the passage name. So the passage name, there we go, is story in it, with the capital I and the capital S, and whatever is in this passage gets run before everything else. And there I will just say set has visited kitchen is false. And of course we can do pretty much anything. If we need arrays later, we can set them up here, doesn't matter. So again, this is where your story starts, but this with this little rocket ship icon. But no matter where your story starts, first always this story in it, wherever this is, gets run. So I just move it up here, just to know that, yeah, on the upper left, for me, it's always the first thing that runs. Always initialize all variables at the beginning, says Lady Mistleaf. And yeah, let's all listen to Lady Mistleaf, because you don't want uninitialized variables anywhere. So whenever you use a variable, please initialize it. And let's see if this did the trick. So stay inside and look in the kitchen, and you enter the kitchen for the first time. It still does not tell us for the first time. So at this point, I think I did something wrong here, because this never runs. This just never runs, no matter what I put here. And I'm not quite sure why this if statement does not run. Yeah. Let's try something. Let's try something different. If 1 equals 1, so this has to be true. And if this doesn't run, I don't know what the problem is. So stay inside the kitchen, and you enter the kitchen for the first time. Okay, so this works. Apparently it really has to do something with my variables. Maybe there's a typo or something. So has visited kitchen. False. Right? Oh, of course. If has visited kitchen is false, and I'm checking if has visited kitchen is true. So if not has visited kitchen. My God. So stay inside the kitchen, and you enter the kitchen for the first time. There we go. Now, and it's dark and smells horrible. I go back and I enter the kitchen again, and it just says here, you enter the kitchen again with this trailing space here between before the period, but now it works. So classic error of getting your booleans wrong, right? True equals false. If has visited kitchen implies it's true. Exactly. Yeah, this was the problem. So and how to get rid of the trailing space? The trailing space here becomes because I have a line break here after the if, and if I undo this now and just pull it up here, I think this should be gone. And this, to me personally, always this kind of little typographical errors. No, it was not that problem. I think it's the line break after before the if. So there we go. I think that was the thing. Yeah, to me always this has highest priority. If there's something, there's a space too much. Where is this space coming from? My God, this is if not has visited kitchen. Oh no, there's another space too much. Yeah, now at this point I'm just scrambling and trying to find where is this space coming from. And now what is another thing that is super important is you have this little debugging, this little bug icon here to test your story. And if you run your story in test mode, you can see and hover pretty much everything, how it's being interpreted internally. So for example here we got the story init passage gets run before everything. Usually you don't see it, but here in the test mode it tells you what it does when you hover over it. So I'm doing a set here, and what kind of set am I doing? Just hover over it and the tooltip tells you exactly the line of code. So let's stay and inside the kitchen, and we can see here this is the if statement, which is cool, but after the if statement, so somewhere after the if statement, there is this space too much. The fun thing is I'm still using this no break thing here, but okay, so now there can't be anything, and now it should be gone. Please be gone. Yes, now it's gone. Okay, so no spaces in between there. Cool. So essentially, with that, I'm going to close all my tests here. And essentially, this is how you can make quite an extensive game. For example, we don't have to confine ourselves to using just some sort of flags like this. For example, we can also say set $player strength. This is not how you write strength. Strength to 5, and later in the game maybe you can award player strength points, and still later you can have links that only show up if the player is of a certain strength. And of course, if you have a link that only shows up, then a certain part of your node tree will only be accessible if a certain condition has been met. And with that you can make some sort of I didn't touch anything this time. You can choose your own adventure games and also have some sort of maybe RPG mechanics in there. And the other thing that is super cool is, again, I said, pretty much anything you can do in HTML and CSS and JavaScript you can do with a Twine game. So for example, if you want to declare a function that you want to use later on, for example, in my latest game I have a function that just capitalizes the first letter of pretty much any word that you give it, and to do this every time by using convert to string and use the character of the first string to uppercase, and then use a split starting at 1 of the rest of the string, and you only want to do this once. And you can of course also style your entire game by using CSS or cascading style sheets, and you can do all of this here in the story. You can say edit story JavaScript, edit story style sheet. You can even change the story format, all passage, proofing, copy, and so on. But the important things to style your story, of course, is here in the style sheet. And this is just plain old CSS. So if I want, for example, I just go with body, so pretty much anything on the web page, and I say text size is 150%. It's font size, not text size. Font size 150%. And of course I'm doing it wrong because it's of course colon and not a comma, it's a semicolon. And so the font, or let's make it 200%. So now I don't have to zoom in every time when I test the game. There we are, everything is at 200%. Of course you can again use div boxes, you can use classes, you can even use jQuery, pretty much anything that you can do with JavaScript. And if you want to use functions in the game later, there also is one gotcha, or one thing that you need to know, because you need to use it as a setup. Use the setup object, and you just say setup, let's say hello world is a function of type let's say in and that one just prints, or no, it doesn't print, it just returns a string, and that's hello world, hello in. And if you want to run this somewhere in your code, for example here before we start the game, I can just use it like this, and you print something, And what do I want to print? Setup hello world Twitch. Please work. Apologies, it doesn't work because I did something wrong, and yeah, bad evaluation. Hello world is not a function. Have I typed this differently? Small hello world return. Yes, I think this is correct. Oh, of course. Hello world. No, it's not of course. I wanted to be super clever and show you something how this is done, but it didn't work. So it says it's not a function. Was it set up? Now I'm not quite sure. You know what? Let's have a look at my story where I have it done like this, and this is the current game that I'm working on that is called Twine Detective. And there, let's peek into the JavaScript, and there it says setup, capitalize, function, capitalize. Probably, oh yeah, of course, I didn't name the function. Yeah, this was not the sacrificial trail, this was Steam story. Yeah, so it's function, of course, hello world. Right? So, no, this is... My god, now I'm completely blanking. It's hello world, yeah, it's function, the function name and the parameters. Yeah, now it should work. So, yeah, let's play this. And it doesn't work. Hello world is not a function. I'm really sorry that you have to bear with me. Setup hello world. What's wrong with this? What's wrong with this setup? Maybe I need to assign it to a variable? No, this can't be. And it's just JavaScript setup hello world function hello world. Again, I have to peek again at how I did this here in this game. This was the style sheet. No, I just copy now the definition here. My god, this nobody should see how I'm doing this. I'm really putting myself out there. So, edit story JavaScript. So, what did I wrong here? Function, collapsibles, and in. Oh, it's probably. Oh, I think in is probably a in string. Is probably, of course, a reserved keyword, and that's the problem. Hello world, hello Twitch. There we go. So, yeah, in was a reserved word, and this is why it didn't work. So, but essentially this is how you do it. Yeah, hashtag developer life, exactly. It should work. What am I doing wrong? Yeah, something stupid like this. So what are the downsides of Twine? One thing you've just witnessed is you have to do a lot of clicking if you want to compare two things. It's not like you have a text editor or some sort of IDE where you can just have open like 15 windows of 15 passages. Now, if you want to edit a passage, you have to double click it and you get no code highlighting or syntax highlighting whatsoever. If you want to change JavaScript, you have to click here and say edit story JavaScript. There you got some code highlighting, some syntax highlighting. You also get some syntax highlighting here in the style sheet, but that's all you get. And the problem is if you, for example, if I cut this kitchen here and come back and realize, oh no, I did something wrong here and hit Control Z, it can't undo it. And this is something, now I'm going to paste it, this is something that's super important, especially when you're just iterating over something that doesn't work. So you, my advice to you is to have a text editor open. For example, I'm using Notepad++, and just do your editing there and just copy and paste over the passages that you have. It's a little bit, yeah, it takes away this sleekness of the Twine editor in a sense. But if you have it like this, on one hand your text editor and on the other hand Twine, it's not that much of an issue. And the cool thing, of course, is in Notepad++ you can use syntax highlighting, and I made a language definition for SugarCube So essentially, you can see here now we got syntax highlighting in SugarCube. So you probably wonder, gee whiz, where can I get this highlighting? And I have put it on GitHub. Let me just find it. SugarCube Notepad++ GitHub. There we go. Let me paste it here in the chat. And yeah, it just tells you how to install it, and there you go. So this is how I usually do my development, because again, if you just copy and paste and then paste it here, there you have in Notepad you have unlimited undos. There you have unlimited ways to essentially screw up your program. Cool. Okay, so essentially I think I've touched on all the basic stuff of how to make a story. Let's review this. One thing is, of course, for example, let's make something else. For example, we want to prompt the player for the name, that we can talk to them via their name. Back. My God, this was a completely misconstructed sentence. That we can use their name and call them by their name. Right, so we might want to use a text box, and the cool thing about SugarCube is, of course, it has, this is GitHub, this is not what I wanted. There we go. No, this is, I closed the SugarCube 2 documentation. Right, and there's a macro. It's a double mac and cheese row that we can use. And this is part of the interactive macros, and that is text box. And I have to zoom out that I am able to click it. And we can see here text box, receiver name, default value, and even a passage and autofocus. So essentially it just says here, what's your favorite pie? Then now for this, as the real X Parker said, for this we need to use the quotation marks even for the actual variable name that we want to put there. So let's try this. And when we start the game, we want a passage before the start of the game. So I create a new passage and just call it, for example, name. Select. And it just says here, enter your handsome name. And then I just say, paste this text box. And we say player name. And yeah, let's keep Blueberry as our default name. And once we're done, the player can click. And again, we just say, start the story, and we go to start, not stories, start. There we go. And if we run this now, the game doesn't ask us for our name, but it already starts with the start of the story. Why is that? Well, of course, we need to tell the story where to start now. And you can do this by hovering here and just say start story here. And now this little green spaceship icon is here. So let's try this and enter your handsome name, Blueberry, and we start the story. Again, notice that I didn't initialize this variable before, player name, but we will see how this works. And here's it's a dark and stormy night. You are out of coffee. What will you do? Player name. And as you've seen, so far I used there we go, the print macro. But usually if you want to just print out a variable, it gets overly cumbersome. Print is helpful if you want to do some sort of expression or return, you want to print what gets returned from a function or so on. But if you just want to print the value of a variable, as in our case, then you just use equals. And this is it, and equals player name. I think this is our variable that we named. Yeah, again, this is case sensitive. So let's try this. Play, enter your handsome name, Dr. Blueberry, and we start the story. What will you do, Dr. Blueberry? And you can see it's super simple. Now you can address the player by their name. And Nick Pro says, hi, what are you making today? Yes, today I'm doing an introduction to the beautiful SugarCube 2 format in Twine to make interactive stories. Again, what is cool about SugarCube 2, by the way, is you can see this sidebar here that is super prominent. Of course, you can also change what is displayed in the sidebar. You can even hide the sidebar automatically for some passages if you want to. You can completely disable it. But let's say and stay inside and look in the kitchen. We enter the kitchen for the first time, go back, and we look into the kitchen again. Okay, now there is still this trailing space. Anyway, what is cool now is that I can go back and have a number of states that I can just return to or go forward to. I can even save my game. And I can even save my states to disk or load them from disk, which is super helpful if you want to make a longer story where you want to give players the option to save because you're going to kill them off at every other opportunity. It's good for players that you allow them to save or that you allow them to backtrack or even to restart the game. And this is built in to SugarCube 2, so you don't, as we've seen it doesn't show up anywhere here. It's given, it's a affordance of this format, which I like very much. Right, so this is asking the player for the name, and we keep the variable for the name, and then we start the game. And of course, we still haven't finished out what we need to do about the coffee. So we can, now we have visited the kitchen before, and if not, what shall we do? What else can we do that the player can do something? I mean, what would be nice is, for example, has visited kitchen equals true, right? So we enter the kitchen and it smells one of these things, like someone burned an entire tire, and you see a cupboard and a stove, for example, because it's a kitchen. Maybe I should put the stove into the square brackets. So I will zoom in now that you can see what I typed. So I just typed cupboard and stove, and if I zoom out now, of course, those two passages will automatically be created, which is again super helpful, because now I can say there is nothing in the cupboard, for example, and now I can just return the player to the previous passage. And I do this by, what was the passage? It was just called kitchen. Kitchen, and again I will display a different text, like okay then. And we go back to the kitchen. And now I can again say, okay, let the variable cupboard searched true. Maybe we need this later, but as you can see, it's super simple to just add variables there. And in the stove, now we can say if cupboard searched doesn't equal true, or if not cupboard searched, I think this is how you do it. Maybe you should, this is super bad game design, maybe you should look in the cupboard first. But what we can say is, now in this passage we can say set, let's say stove first to true, and else. So essentially what we're going to say is, now if we haven't searched the cupboard first, then we tell the player to search the cupboard first. Otherwise, and now I will end here now this if block, just only need one of this. There is a big bad monster monster in the stove. And you can see here now I have a passage that is only accessible from when this condition is not met. If we have searched the cupboard, then only will this new path open up. And of course we need to make it possible for the player to return. Okay, then, and we go back to kitchen, otherwise they're trapped and can't return. So again, you can see this super helpfully displayed here by those two ways pointing arrows. And what we can also do is now, because we have a variable here for the stove and the cupboard, so if we can say, if not cupboard search, but stove first is true. So I'm going to just copy this. And now here, when we're in the cupboard, there is nothing in the cupboard, but first, or after this, there is nothing in the cupboard, we can say if stove first. So if this is true, and I will just make the if block here, made you look. And there is nothing in the cupboard. And from there on, we will just see how far we can go, and then we will check on the monster. Right, first I will have a sip of water. And let's start the story. So when we go outside, yeah, there's no coffee, let's go back inside. So we can look in the kitchen. And you can see here, of course, it's super valid to have links inside the paragraph of text. It doesn't have to be at the end, for example. So first, let's look at the stove. And it says, yeah, maybe you should look in the cupboard first. We can't do anything else, but okay then. Well, then let's have a look at the cupboard, and it says, made you look. And there is nothing in the cupboard. Okay then. Well, then let's have a look at the stove, and there's a big bad monster in the stove. Okay then. And now we return. Maybe we should have this okay then. We should not give player the opportunity to go back once they see the monster. So instead, how do we do this? Well, actually it's super simple. You probably, if you're a programmer, it's a trivial solution. We need to move this okay then into the first if block. So now we can only return if cupboard hasn't been searched yet. Otherwise there is the big bad monster in the stove, and from there we can never return to this part here. And now we are here in this monster part. Makes sense, right? And this is a pretty good way of structuring an interactive story. Because you, at a certain point, it's like, I always see it as a sort of cliffs, right? You allow the player to have a certain area to explore, but at a certain point they have to jump down a cliff or just an incline where they can't get up. So there is a new set for them to explore, but they never can return to where they were before. And this is exactly what we have here. Once we have this monster, at least in this version or in this current state, there is no arrow leading back to this point before. So if we want to have some sort of a time that passes in our story where there, for example, right now it's a dark, as we have it here, it's a dark and stormy night. So then we see the monster and maybe something happens here and we spend a long time, and then when we return the sun should already be up and everything is different. Instead of using a lot of flags and seeing things here, if sun has risen, if player has spent so and so many hours in this passage, instead you just link back to a similar looking set of passages, but it's an entire different set of passages that is just when the sun has risen, where there is some sort of progression there. So in terms of programming, this is more of a, it's a different approach. It's more of a writerly approach, because you're not changing a lot of the state of the passages themselves. You're just creating essentially a new level where the sun is different and everything that has changed is already humanly prepared and doesn't have to come from a procedural generation. That being said, of course, you could make it like this. For example, if you have some sort of a big hub world or just a big space, it doesn't have to be a big space, just some sort of space where the player can always return, and different things have happened in between, and you really want to emphasize that the player has some agency in this story world, because it's always nice, I feel, if you track certain things or have certain flags in your code at certain positions. For example, if you have maybe an adventuring story and your player doesn't have to cross a stream or something, but you allow the player to go into the water of a stream or so on. It's a dead end, but nevertheless, once the player is in the stream, you set a flag and says player is wet, for example. And then you track how many passages the player is outside, and then you can say maybe player is not wet anymore, so their clothes have dried. But at a later passage you can check if player is wet, and then it's super nice if you have a text that reads like you can hear your footsteps on the pavement, and if player is wet, and your soggy clothes sloshing against your arms, for example. And I, as a player, always find that it's cool. The game remembered that, and it's more like a dialogue. It's more like playing with a dungeon master, with a DM that really notices all those little things that you tried, and it adds to the flavor. And I think this is what makes interactive fiction, if it's done well, really powerful, and if you track the right things. Because again, this made you look, I mean, it's super stupid, but still it feels like to me as a player that, okay, this is now a nudge. I'm being trolled almost on a personal level by the creator of this game. It doesn't feel like some disembodied experiences or entity of a team of game designers made an experience for me, and it always feels like I'm in a big mall, and everything is not very personal, while things like this, like interactive fiction with mostly one author, it feels like a conversation, like a little back and forth, like a again, like a little role-playing session that you have face-to-face. And I'm sorry I'm rambling again, but again, this is where I think that this interactive fiction can be super powerful. Right, Lady Misleaf has fed the automated unicorn, thank you, and says, player is wet, do not stick your fingers in power outlets as it will cause double damage. Exactly. Things like this. If I remember in the game, or I don't remember that I've maybe jumped in the pond before, and then I'm trying to do some electric installations, and then the game says, you get a big shock because you're still wet from before, and I think, oh dear, I forgot, but the game didn't. And this is again something super literally powerful. And Relax Parker says, gotta run, have a nice night. Again, thank you so much for dropping by. It won't be much longer, but if you can, you can always catch up in the WOD once it's up. Right. So I think for starters, in terms of interactive fiction and making stories with Twine and SugarCube, I think this should suffice. It should give you an idea of where you can take things, of where things lead. And just let me show you how, for example, games like the Sacrificial Trail, that is this Oregon Trail-like game, are made. So the first thing here, for example, is the UI bar. I can just deactivate it and destroy it if I don't want players to go back. And I have here some sound that plays, and here good old HTML displaying just the game's title screen and the change log and so on. So from there we start music. I'm stopping any UI music or sounds that are going, and we start with darkness, all engulfing darkness, and it's just text, and it brings us to look at person. And this is the end of the intro, and then we got a button that says don't look back, and from there we can fade the music and so on. So this is quite, as you can see, quite elaborate. So when we prepare something, again, I'm just setting an effect text, just a string to something, and I'm using this case a temporary variable, and so on and so forth. So again, you can see it looks a lot like before. I can even use, we didn't have this replace macro. I'm really sorry, I'm still not quite sure how to move my mouth that it sounds like macro. Anyway, this replace thing here is super helpful, because you just say here in this case effect, and this is just an HTML entity that has a name, for example, a div block with an ID of effect. And then you can just, at a certain point, replace it, or even wait, for example, 1 or 2 seconds and have an animation play like fade in, fade out, and so on. So I'm not stepping through the entire code of the sacrificial trail because this has already been done. Macron. Is it French? Macron. It's macro. Okay, I'm macro, so I'm going with the crow. Okay, this is going to be, as we say in German, my donkey's bridge is a little reminder. It's like a little rhyme that you use yourself to remind yourself of something. So Macron. I will always think of the French president now. Wonderful, thank you so much. It's Macron. Let's go with Macron. This is, at least it's funny, and until it becomes obnoxious. Right, this is the sacrificial trail, and on my Ludum Dare page for the sacrificial trail, there's of course, let me find it. Sacrificial trail Ludum Dare. There we go. Still have it saved in my links. Yeah, if you're really interested about the source code and what it does, there is, how long is this? It's 1 hour and 13 video of me stepping through the code, essentially line by line, where it's just one thing. There's one formula or one algorithm where I say, yeah, this is the magic formula. I don't know why it's working, but it is working and I'm not touching it. Right, and the other game that I'm currently working in, that is called Twine Detective, for lack of a better name. And we don't usually pronounce the W much in macro. Yeah. Who is the dude with the white hair? I don't know. Probably not some douchey guy with a little tail there. It's, yeah. I still haven't found time to get my hair done, but hopefully in 1.5 weeks or so. I'm looking forward to having a week of vacation. Probably this is the time where I can afford just a couple of hours to have my hair done. Yes, it takes 4 hours to get my hair white. It's crazy. So yeah, this is the Twine Detective game, and if I hit play, you will notice that it looks similar to what we've seen before, and yet still different. The one thing is, now that I know how to use the sidebar, I can do pretty much anything, and I overcomplicated things for myself. For example, we're now in the location of apartment, and if I hover over it, it's sunny, and it's currently the time of day is morning. The investigator, there is nothing in the inventory, but we got here a character with some stats, preferences, and even looks. So essentially the game, this is the character creation part of my game. Essentially, depending on which thing you choose, for example, so why do you get up every morning that I don't have to look at it again or to learn more about this world and who's running it. And then you get +1 knowledge, which is also reflected here in your character stats. But if I go back and say that I don't have to look at it again, you can gain +1 bitterness and so on. Again, as we've had it before, you can enter your name like Blueberry. That's my last name. Blueberry, a perfectly serviceable name for a perfectly serviceable investigator. And then you can enter your first name and your nickname. Let's go with Pix. And all right. So again, the game says, yeah, is this your name? Time to get going, or something wrong with the name? And I'm going to click now time to get going, and please look at what it happens here with this word investigator, because now the investigator is named. This one changes here to the name, and so on and so forth. We step to a small mirror, and here I can say which kind of eyes my person has, my investigator has. If I say playful eyes and click on eyes, then playful means 1 more skill. If I choose good-hearted eyes, it's +1 compassion. And you see, this is what I find super interesting, that you can only do it with text games, where essentially the player decides how the story goes and also influences the stats by what they look like, essentially. So my clothes fit me like a glove, or they dangle loosely from my frame. And you feel like you should do something about your weight, but you also feel like that it's a matter of tomorrow picks, or even next month picks. Again, I'm using this just a variable that I know from the player's name, that it's their nickname in the text. Again, I feel that it's quite powerful. And again, of course, what is your vice? Is it coffee? Is it tobacco? Is it tea? Or is it alcohol? Let's go with alcohol. And also, by the way, once we put on our clothes, I even got here in our inventory the wallet. And here, for example, for our preferences, the vice is now alcohol. And this is collect my things. This is so far. Currently, it says you see 2 items: a detective license and a train ticket. Yeah, this is now my super convoluted way of doing inventory system and so on. But you can see where my current state of this game is going. And the actual passages that have text on them, again, I have to restart Twine. Tea is healthy and not a vice. I know, but I wanted players who prefer to drink tea to make tea also a vice, and maybe even have some sort of comedic twist to when your vice is just healthy green tea or something. Chocolate, on the other hand, right, maybe I could switch a tea for chocolate, because I mean, with coffee and tea, it's very close. And for example, if you in my game, if you choose maybe tea or coffee, this one part where that leads to what is your vice, this is this huge passage here, where it's a switch statement. So if your vice is tea or coffee, you put a pot on the stove. So it doesn't matter if it's tea or coffee, you put a pot on the stove and the water boils quickly. And now here again, if it's tea, you get a different text than when it's coffee. But still, no matter if it's coffee, that's how you like it. No milk, no sugar. And if it's coffee, it even says black as the night and plenty of it. If it's tobacco, you get this section here. If it's alcohol, you get this section here. And tomorrow you will run out of tobacco, tea, chocolate, whatever is set in this variable as vice. But for today, if it's tea or coffee, you return the old can to its place. If it's tobacco, you put back the pack of cigarettes. If it's alcohol, you put the bottle back. And yeah, you can see it's just a very simple switch statement, but as a player, it really feels that, okay, the story has completely changed depending on what I've used. And again, it's the later the callback to something the player did earlier comes, I think the more powerful it gets when you're playing interactive fiction. It's a bit like in an RPG game where the game starts out and let's say you're a level 1 character and you get bitten by the first rat that you have to kill in one of the first missions, and the rat bites you a scar into your ear, for example. And then later in the game someone comments on, look at the scar on your ear. Looks like a rat bit you in your ear. And I think this is super powerful because the game really remembers such all those little things. I mean, of course, you expect a game to remember the big things, like you've rescued the princess, or you have like a plus 40 in dexterity or something. But those minor things, again, I feel to me this is all what I find super interesting and super nice. Yeah, right now I have you can also use includes in SugarCube. For example, I have here that says check stat change, and I used you don't have to use this f underscore, just to me that it's some sort of a function, and it just checks if there was a change in the stats. As you've seen it before, if I click something and then it says knowledge +1 or bitterness -1 and so on. So this is essentially what this does, and you can do this easily by just using include, and then you enter the name of the passage. Again, it's just like linking a different source code file in there. You just include it, and this is how you can do this sort of of functions if you don't want to use JavaScript functions for that. And again, you look the paper over and how many of them had genuinely paid attention to your last name. And again, here I'm using a set of either, and the last name is just one of the array of last names that I provide the game in the beginning, or provide the game with in the beginning. So here, this is how my story looks like for this game. So you can see it's a bit bigger. So I got here, essentially I'm just using objects to make enumerations out of it, because don't have enums in JavaScript. So this is how maybe, I mean, again, I'm 200 miles ahead in terms of thinking about programming my game, about the structure in terms of where I'm making the game, because the reason for using this sort of item license, of using this kind of enums, of objects as enums, is should I ever decide to translate or localize this game to German, I only have one place to use this or to change it, and everywhere else in the game it should work. Yeah, all my items, currently I have just 3 items in the game. Again, it's just an object of objects that can say is container. A license is not a container, but a wallet is a container. It can even check if it is visible, and every item has a location. For example, everything starts in the apartment, and one location could be the player's inventory. So again, I've said before that Twine is not as much state-based, or not at all, in terms of where it keeps track, where you, for example, put items down, where the light propagates, where rooms are on top or next to each other, and so on and so forth, because you should use a different programming environment or language, like the TEDs would be best suited for that. What I'm doing now is exactly what I've been arguing against, is picking a language that does not, or in this case, an environment that does not keep track of any kind of world state, and now I force it in like this and doing it manually. I don't know why I'm constantly torturing myself with this kind of stuff, but again, programming is so much fun, and it's, yeah. And you can see here of my character. Again, here is my set of different eyes. So I'm just checking against the keys and not the actual values. Because the good thing about this is, again, I've said before that JavaScript is very forgiving, and this is most of the time is helpful, because if you use an uninitialized variable, JavaScript most likely won't complain until you try to do something very weird with it. But if you set a variable that is not initialized in SugarCube to something, well, then suddenly it becomes initialized with this value, so you, as a player, you don't have to worry about it. But the downside, of course, is if you think something works, but JavaScript just swallows any errors and says, hey, JavaScript, did this work out? And JavaScript says, yeah. Okay, good. But JavaScript just didn't know what to do with it. You don't get an error. And using this kind of objects as enums, you get an error, because if something is not defined, you really get an error that it's not defined. Right here, the player's looks, the player's stats, and here the environment. I even have, you can see here, I have the groundwork for a system for daytime and weather. Currently, I'm not doing anything with it apart from displaying that it's cloudy, sunny, and so on. But of course, I can change just the weather variable by using setting it to a different key in this object. And here are the last names, the first names, the nicknames, and this is super important. Well, this is how I do the handover. I don't have to initialize it. Like I said, in JavaScript, you don't really have to initialize something. But if I want to hand over some data from one passage to the next, I'm using this link data object, which it just says, it has here just 2 properties. One is active. Usually it's false, but if it's true, then a certain function runs on it, and in the array is everything that happens on it. Let me just quickly show it to you before I think we're going to call it a day. For example, if you say here, no, this is where it starts. So why do you get up in the morning? That somebody might need my services. And then we go to intro 2. But everything in this here is part of the link. So if I click something, or not something, if I click this link, then this block of code will be run. And in this case, I'm going to set link data, create a new link data object. Now it's say active is true, and here the array is stat, the stat is compassion, and the change is 1. I can use multiple stats. This is why it's an array. I can say stat compassion plus 1, or in this case -1, for example, or -5. Yeah, you get the picture. And essentially in the next passage that follows it, this one is just check stat change. And this is what happens here, and this stack change essentially just goes through this array And for all the stats that are changed, it just changes their stats. And if a stat is undefined, so here I'm really checking whether it is defined or not, because if it is undefined and I add +1 to it, it's still undefined, because something that is not defined and you add or subtract 1 to it, what value is it? It's still undefined. And this is why I have to initialize it to 0 if it's not initialized. And essentially, yeah, and then it just displays this little text box which just says +1 or -1, or because if it's negative I don't have to add the minus. And then I just say, yeah, it's now false. So yeah, you can see how complicated you can make things for yourself when trying to make things less complicated, because again, I could also have hard-coded just a value that says, yeah, if you click this, then compassion is compassion +1, but I have to manually draw, for example, this little text box. So, my God, I've been talking quite a lot now, and I didn't show, I think, a lot in terms of interactive fiction. But I hope if you have never heard of this before, maybe you got some ideas now for some stories. Maybe you have some stories in your mind that you always thought maybe this could work as a game, but coding up or just thinking about making sprites is giving me headache. So maybe it could work as an interactive fiction, because let me switch back to this. There we go, interactive fiction. Because maybe some things you get stifled in your creativity, at least I know for a fact for myself, is that when you have a nice idea, the kernel of idea, and you're super motivated to get started, and then you realize, okay, but now I need a sprite handler, I need user interfaces, I need players to change the freaking field of view because they will complain otherwise, I need controller support, I need Steam achievements, and so on. And then you realize, my God, it's so much work just to get all these affordances in place. I don't really want to start working on this. And the cool thing about Twine is you just sit down, you write a paragraph of text, and the paragraph of text links to another one, and you have a game. A very bare bones game, but it's super easy to expand from there. And the refactoring, I mean, unless you're doing things like I'm doing, is very much manageable. This is why it's, I mean, if you're of a writerly kind, it's very easy. If things start flowing, you don't have to occupy yourself with coding up a lot of complicated logic, because you can always do this later on, and you can just keep going, which I think again is super nice. And if you include those little variables and callbacks to player actions, again, it can be a super powerful experience for me as a player, and for you as a game maker or as a storyteller. You don't kill yourself over making it, of course, unless you do things like I do, but this is a different story. And yeah, one thing that I didn't even touch with Twine and SugarCube so far is, of course, there are certain libraries you can include for generative text, for example. In SugarCube 2, you can even use your variables when you're drawing SVG graphics, for example. So just, for example, the time of day could change how you draw a certain, I don't know, illustration in the game where the sky suddenly is now red or anything. So yeah, again, the sky is the limit, especially in terms of polishing. But yeah, at the core, at the heart is just this super easy and super friendly and super approachable way of just, you write it down and it works in the browser, and super simple as that. Right, one thing, right, I need to, this was the wrong sorry. There we are. I'm the small one, and this is the important thing is, of course, if you want to export your story, because right now, if you hit this home button, all your stories are here. But the problem is, if you reset your computer or something else happens, all those stories are gone. Because if you want to keep them, you need to publish them, you need to export them. And there are two ways to export them. The one thing is by this little cogwheel next to the story, and where it's just publish to file. And this creates a HTML file. You can also use it here in the game. It doesn't work when I zoom in. Sorry, I have to click it and then zoom in. And also here you have publish to file. Of course, you got other things like story statistics or the proofing copy, which is just just the entire text of the game, one after the other, that you can proofread it, but I don't know why it would be helpful, because in my case, you can see here, there is not so much gameplay. And this, by the way, this is the story banner. This is just an encoded PNG file. So this is a lot of the story itself. But the cool thing again is, if you publish it to a file, it's just one HTML file, and you can just open it in a browser and it's the game, or you can drag and drop it onto Twine and you can continue editing it. And it's just a couple of kilobytes, unless of course you do it as I do, and I use a base64 encoded PNG file there. The other thing is, what's a bit problematic or not that easy to link is if you want to have some images or music or sound effects there, because they have to either sit in the same directory also on your server wherever you're playing this or making it accessible to people. It has to be in the same directory, or you need to hard code the links to some other server where you're storing those things. So yeah, this is just something to keep in the back of your mind if you want to make things a bit bigger. But that all being said, yeah, by the way, Cursibu says, nice introduction. You're very welcome. I hope I could carry across a bit of my passion for interactive fiction, because, I mean, it's weird. I love pixel art, 3D graphics, making things super polished and nice. But then again, I also like just using text and using your imagination. Cool. All right. So yeah, I've been rambling for over 2 hours again. And with that, again, I hope I could introduce you to or pique your interest a bit to Twine. And again, of course, let me post the link to the jam. Where was it? Oh no, I closed the browser with the, oh dear. But I can get it back. I think I can get it back. This was not it. Where's my menu bar? There's my menu bar. Beginner IF Jam. There it was. And again, there we go. You like reading, so it's normal. Thank you. So yeah. Okay, so good that I'm normal. So again, a beginner IF Jam, if you want to take part, it's super chill jam. It's not ranked. It's just try making games, try to make an interactive fiction story, get it out there, and maybe it's something for you. And even if it's not, it's still a nice experience and something in your tool belt as a game maker to know how this could be done. And again, if you want to incorporate it into engines such as Unity, please look at Ink from Inkle. Did I post the link? Yeah, let's make sure and also post the link. Inkle. I mean, I'm using just Google, and if I enter Inkle, the first thing that comes up is it. Again, this is super cool because it got Unity integration, and if you have a writer on the team, if you are on a team, it's super simple because the writer just has to write on this ink file, on their ink file, and don't have to have this unwieldy Unity project on their side to work with and potentially break things or get things out of sync. So yeah, I feel it's super cool. And with ink, again, it's very writer focused. So you have a little bit less in terms of control flow, but it shouldn't be done in ink. But you can essentially just write a parser for yourself and have some sort of certain tokens that you use in ink while writing. And from that, I think I've seen people just use ink for a graphic novel and just change characters and moods and backgrounds just from parsing the output from ink. So this is also an option. Cool. All right. Again, I'm rambling and still got so much water to drink. Yes, I thank you for all you for your extended attention to me rambling and gushing about Twine. I hope you have a great week, and yeah, I will see you next week, probably as well on Sunday, and I don't know in what state I'm in because next week is going to be a bit stressful for me, but yeah, we will see how it goes. But it's always nice hanging with cool people like you on Twitch. And Cursibu redeemed unicorn, so cheers to you, Cursibu. Damn fine cup of water. And with that being said, let me find the correct button like a noob with their first day on the stream deck. There we are. Have a great week, have a great evening, have a wonderful $ time of day, and I see you dollar next time. And there we are, $ farewell greeting.